Hi, Ben here from Supercoach Insider. It is the gather round bringing you all the information from Saturday gameplay. We're going to keep it like Horn Francis. We're going to turn 4 quarters into 1 quarter effort is pretty much what we're going with today. Speaking of going with today, North Melbourne, welcome back. You're shit again. And Swiz cannot be happier.
How are
The
you,
Sheasel
boys? How are
Show.
you, Betty?
Swizzy, SC Insider 100. Come check it out, like, subscribe, get amongst it, and let's go straight up and in. Brisbane Lions North Melbourne game. Welcome back, Lachie Neale, his first full 4-quarter effort with 176 Supercoach. Swizz, what did you notice from this game, and who else impressed you?
The big thing was the North Melbourne game style. We knew there's going to be some teething issues with it, so Brisbane just kept getting out of the back all day long. That's why Danaher and Hipwood had such a easy game. But the big thing was no attention to Neale the whole game. Like, we thought Dunkley would have a bit of a field day, which he did, but I think if anything, it just proves again that Neale needs to get attention and tagged. So that'll be something to be watching over the next couple of weeks, because 177, I was looking at trying to maybe get in Took, but now Neale's now the one that I'm thinking, is he the one that I'm trying to rush to get in? But yeah, does the more attention come his way now?
Yeah, 30 clearances between Neale and Dunkley. So 13 clearances just for Neale. Sorry. He smashed everyone. So 17 contested possessions, 13 clearances, which is absolutely huge. And when you bring clearances into it, I mean, Luke Davies-Uniacke had half of that with 7. And outside of that, there's not many, like 3 or 4 apiece is pretty much where it kind of gets to. So he was definitely dominant. 176 Supercoach. He was on like 100 at halftime and killing it. Shout out to M as well. Supercoach Mama, who had him in her team, so very much welcoming of that news there. But yeah, Brisbane had, I think, the most marks in forward 50 like forever. I think it was a record as far as that goes. North Melbourne, there was even footage on. I think it was McKay or someone pointing, saying, "Oh, Core, that's your player." And he goes, "Yeah." Takes like 4 steps back and then literally charges into the next contest and leaves Danaher out the back on his own. So look, going on, let's go Sheasel, though. Keeps the 100-ton run going with 100 Supercoach. Did cop a cork and a bit of a banged-up thumb. So, the coach came out after the game, Clarkson said, he did miss a couple of kicks later on, basically in account of the fact that he did have a corked leg, which impacted his kicking. So I'm still stoked he scored 100 Supercoach, though. He expects him to get up for next week. So there's definitely a fingers crossed there. Because they got butchered, I mean, Zeebel's probably the other one, keeps going up with his relevant scores with 106 Supercoach. Had, some kickouts and a few bits and bobs to go with it. 6 contested possessions, a lot of meters gained just doing the long bomb. Zeebel is pretty much what we're expecting for that one. And the other surprise I thought was, Luke Davies-Uniacke. I know Chris was big on him after a couple of rounds, brought him into his side last week. He didn't perform as advertised. And Chris was going the early crow saying he was getting a 150, Swizz.
Yeah, well, I think it was just because they got towed up so much in the midfield too yesterday. But he kind of recovered his score, because it was looking at one point he was probably going to go about 75. So they managed to get a little bit of a junk time and boost that up. But it was actually Simpkin and Phillips doing most of the work in the first half. LDU was kind of the backward step, but once Simpkin got subbed off and Phillips copped that shoulder stinger, LDU managed to recover himself to a 90.
Yeah, the interesting part out there. So Phillips, who we spoke about previously having, maybe sketchy job security, comes into this game with, maybe he was named on the ball. So we're like, hey, maybe a little bit more security. And now what's happened is he did cop a bit of a shoulder knock himself. So there is a watch on him whether his shoulder is fine, but he played out the game. So maybe there's not too much concerning there. What is concerning though is Jai Simpkin did have, he went off, he got subbed. Apparently he's going to need surgery on his hand or his thumb or something or other, a finger. So that now provides even more job security for Will Phillips. Go figure, who did get 74, was on about 49 at halftime though. So I'm glad he did slow down. Now, speaking of someone who actually picked up their game though, was McKenna. Good old Connor McKenna was on 0 at quarter time. Someone on Twitter was saying, "Oh, he hasn't even had a touch yet." And I was like, no, he had a touch. He paddled the ball forward at one point and then got pushed off the ball. That was the only touch he had, was a paddle on.
The biggest reason for that, mate, was I think the first 10 goals were without a miss. It was just literally going into each team's forward line, a kick, mark, goal. and then back to the centre. So McKenna's getting no chance of even rebound 50s or even kickouts. So the defenders were, I think there wasn't a defender that was over 10 within the first 20 minutes of that game, which was unreal.
Yeah, Brisbane defense wasn't great. I mean, Daniel Rich had 13 touches. The Wilmot actually had only 10 touches, but because he got 5 tackles and kicked a goal, that's pretty much how he was actually able to put together a fairly decent score. So Wilmot got a 68, but generally speaking, there wasn't a whole lot back there for defense for Brisbane. And McKenna was also part of that. So he had 15 touches in the end, got lucky with a boost, got a goal in I think it was the last quarter to kind of pump up his score. Because he looked horrible. He looked like he was on for about a 20 or a 30, scraped together a 55 Supercoach. So after how he started, I was kind of happy that he got that through the line.
Yeah, and Wilmot at least was getting up the ground a little bit, that defensive wing role, so that allowed him to get the tackles. But yeah, if you were a defender yesterday, in particular, in the Brisbane lineup, you could have just brought your deck chair and watched the game because it wasn't going down there. What did Brisbane have? 42, 42, 43 shots. It was absolute ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it was an absolute belting. And speaking of a belting, let's move on. I don't know if there's much more Supercoach relevancy out of that one, but the Bombers, your missus must be happy, Swiz, because they got 104 up on the Ds with a 77. And look, the Essendon, it all gets simplified down to the first quarter as far as to summarize this game for me. Now, it was Setterfield and Clary, and it was the absolute mopping up of the century where I love nothing more than having a premium absolutely smother another one of my premiums. Like Clary's a little campfire, and that's not a ginger joke. That's just, Setterfield was smothering all over him and just putting out that fire. It was delightful to see as far as the skill set of Setterfield, the GOAT status and to another level. But I wish I didn't own both of them when he did it. And I put it all down to, say, JP, who I think traded out Setterfield this week and maybe doesn't have Clary, was putting the early hex on saying, I hope they both score poorly. And at quarter time, I was like, get out of the chat. Get out of the chat group, JP. Absolutely killing it. But the good news for Clary owners in this one, and I'll get into my Clary VC debacle straight after this game here. But, he was on bugger all like 23 or something or other quarter time. They were both doing horrible. Getting into halftime, he was on. Actually, no, he was only on 25 or something at halftime, wasn't he? Clary was on bugger all.
Yeah, I think it might have been 30, and that's something like 31 or so. It's something really low, and he barely touched it. I think he only had. I feel like it was only 9 touches, but it might have had 11 touches. It was 9 or 11 coming into halftime.
I think it was yeah. So he had 2. Yeah, so 2 at quarter time, 9 in the second.
Yeah, I think he was on 11 touches then.
Yeah, and then he worked. I worked out he had like a 38 points third quarter. So I was like, okay, if he has another 38-point quarter, I was like, he'll go and he'll get a 101, and that would be serviceable. And Chris was going the early crow, and he kind of stopped himself because he goes, "Oh, it's Clary. He's a big second half player, so I'll save my judgment." And then comes out with a 115 Supercoach, had like 40 touches. I did see a few people tweeting online like the worst 40 touch game ever. You can be very effective with his hands. So many handballs in this game for Clary. I mean, he had 26 handballs for the game, 445 meters gained, but the game was done when he got 20 touches in the fourth quarter. Very, very, very lucky to scrape through with a 115. I was watching this game going, holy crap, if that was my safe choice on a VC, I was like, I don't even want to risk the captain anymore. Do I just take the 115 and bail and just go, hey, look, I'll like a 120, but I was like looking at with Bontempelli, who I'll go into next, going, I don't want to risk. Bont's gone 2 120s and 2 scores under 110. So I'm like, in a wet weather game, I was like, yeah, he did well last week, but do I want to risk it for the sake of 7 points or whatever I thought maybe he might get? And in the end, Bontempelli towed up, which goes to summarize my season. Glad I wasn't alone though, because I put that tweet out, and I'm always real about my successes and my failures, but someone else did the exact same thing. I said, watching Clary get absolutely dominated and play poorly, I got very scared as far as maybe I should just take the 115 and bail. Yeah, so Swiz, are you a Grundy man or not a Grundy man?
I'm a non-Grundy man. Quite interesting. Yeah, he's gone the 120, but I think he got beaten on the night. They got beaten in hit outs. Both of the big boys combined for 5 goals for the Bombers. So most people were thinking, oh, here's Grundy's going to do an absolute job on Draper. But I had a couple of Bombers supporters talking to me about how Draper's actually been doing really well as defensive ruckman, and Phillips maybe even more so. And then they've got the option that the other one floats forward. They've clearly worked on their forward craft over the summer. So it's might be something food for thought going forward that if your ruck is against Draper Phillips, you don't VC or see them. Because they seem to be doing a really good number on the ruck. Yeah, so Grundy's still got the 120, 128, whatever he's still got, which is still a great score. But at the same time, what we were probably expecting Grundy to do against the Bombers lineup, 140, 150, it just didn't happen. They played really well, those Bombers rucks.
Yeah, I agree. He lost the hitouts and he kicked 5 goals between them, which I consider a big L. But when you look at his stats on their own, it's like he still had a really good game. 5 free kicks to 2, so he gave away less free kicks than he got, so that's automatically really good. 12 contested possessions, 6 clearances amongst it, 24 hitouts, so you got beaten definitely in that element. Big speculation though, so they play later after the Anzac Day. It was Anzac Day Eve, isn't it?
Yeah,
They
Anzac
play
Eve Monday.
Yeah, and there is speculation that Gawn might be up for that game. So he's doing well in his rehab like he always does, which means that there might have only been the 3 game without Gawn. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that one. Richmond themselves don't exactly have a ruck at this current point in time. So I wonder whether they ease Gawn back in as a forward or what they do, because it's going to be really interesting. Either way, I think against Richmond, though, Grundy probably still has at least another good week in him. And then you just have to ride that break even if you have him to then move him on pretty quickly, I think, is pretty much what we're going to have to go with.
I've been saying that as captain. Gawn's not missing the Anzac Eve. It's their biggest game on
Oh,
the
yeah,
calendar.
true. So what do you think then? Is that they maybe play him forward a little bit more then? Ease him
Forward,
in?
play him as a sub, whatever, as long as he's out there doing the top. Like, it's not as big as the Collingwood Essendon game. And nothing, like, I've said before, it doesn't take away from the actual day of Anzac and the remembering of that. But yeah, from a footy point of view, nothing compares to the actual match. But Anzac Eve is probably now Melbourne's and to a point, Richmond's biggest games on their calendar. And that's no disrespect to the King's birthday match or the opening game of the season, but it is huge. So, yeah, you think as captain, he wants to be there for that, and that's why he's been doing everything to get himself up. So I think he does probably play forward. Maybe they even still go Van Rooyen as the second option just for this week, because as you said, Richmond don't have a ruck, and they just go, okay, Gawny, you're in the goal square. Benny Brown might get another week to recover, and then they go from there.
Yeah, that was interesting. Ben Brown laid out on this one. Might have been to do with the weather conditions, whether he didn't get up or whether they just go, hey, maybe we don't really need the extra tall for this one. It'd be interesting to see, though, if they are winning a lot against Richmond, and I wouldn't want to be playing Richmond on the rebound either. So it's going to be really interesting as
Melbourne's
far
going
as...
to tell us next week, mate. I'll tell you, absolutely tell us.
Yeah, so I mean, who plays... Yeah, so that's
no
the interesting part.
Melbourne
So
will be
they
hurting.
might even sub out Max Gawn then if they're winning by a lot. It's like, hey, you're here, really good, sub him out, get you some Ks into legs, and then call it a day. So look, it's going to be interesting. You have to hold Grundy for that one there. The other thing to note as well, we should probably mention that Setterfield did get a 91, so scraped through his break even, I think, of 88. So holding on fairly strong for those that held him in this game. The other thing to note was a lot of people brought in Redmond after his few good games before that. It was interesting as I think, who was it? So Zerk Thatcher had a little bit of an ankle roll,
Looked
but
like he
came
got
back
shot.
out though. Yeah, but then came back out and held up an end for a little bit, which was interesting.
That's for my wife. She's like, I've never seen someone get shot before and then manage to come back on a quarter later. It was
a bit of a
so,
jab.
Redmond
and
obviously in that period did have to play more defensive. Just sort of that changing of the defense on the run there. So that did impact him for that quarter, and then managed to still put together a serviceable 77. But I think if Zerk Thatcher doesn't go down in that moment, he still probably scrapes together a 90 plus score. And it also hurt him because the Bombers were so dominant too. And that, like, the ball just wasn't going down there. Their midfield absolutely towered Melbourne's midfield. Like Zachy Merritt, we always talk about him being that one that drops value and then you pick him up later as that possible M8. But as captain, the biggest criticism of him was how's he going to be in defensive side of his game. But yeah, 7 tackles, the 35 touches to go with it. He looks absolutely prime.
Yeah, Zach Merritt, 134 Supercoach, might get suspended. I think that's a bit questionable though. But look, the journos like to write something. There might be something in it. So look, wait and see for that one as far as how far that goes. The other thing to note, Ridley, 91 Supercoach, 500 meters gained, which I find funny. But I think where he's being impacted, apart from this one, he was a little bit deeper and got some intercepts. But I think as a whole team, Essendon aren't relying on one specific defender. And I found Ridley's kind of going for the easier option sometimes where he'll kick it to another player still inside the defensive 50. So if he gets it quite deep, he's not kind of blasting it out of the 50, getting the extra points for, defensive 50 rebound, but he's kind of hitting up the target, 20, 25, 30 meters away, and then they take it out. So I think he's kind of losing some points in that aspect as far as, maybe not kicking it out of the 50 as much because he's looking for the other options to lead up. Yeah, so I think he's still definitely someone you could probably get off as far as ownership. Now, we do need to talk about 2Ds before we move on quickly.
I think actually 3, but you're going to talk about the 2
Which
rookies.
Ds?
I think there's 3 rookies.
Oh, okay, yeah, I wasn't even thinking rookies specifically. So one was Pickett. Some people got on him. Still kicked 2 goals too, but only had the 11 touches. So 63% disposal efficiency kind of killed him. And the fact that the Ds lost badly meant that those goals probably didn't get much scaling either. 61 Supercoach, she'd be upset if you paid 360 odd or whatever he was,
like
390.
The man Abdul, I'm pretty sure he jumped on him.
I know a few people did. Chandler, I thought, was serviceable enough and faded a bit, but did kick a goal. So he got 56 Supercoach. So I think there's enough there to kind of just ride him out for another week or two before moving on.
Yeah, he had the opportunity to kick another goal too. It just fell short. So yeah, that's his game, and that is sort of he's 10 possessions, a bit of tackling pressure, and if he can kick a couple of goals, which I think he will next week against the Tigers, very easily could come out and score us 70 next week. But that's what he does for us.
It was on bench a bit too, 72% time on ground.
I think at half time he had 59, 60%
he was,
time on ground. It was
used
quite
a
low.
lot less. Painful.
Van Rooyen probably didn't have the impact we wanted, but did get a very lucky goal from a free kick, it was perfect for us that brought him in. I brought him in like just before the bounce with the news Benny Brown was out. But, kind of played his role. Conditions didn't suit him. So hopefully they continue to think work in progress and back him in, especially the fact that after Richmond they've got I think they've got North Melbourne. So
and then West Coast. No, they've already played West Coast. Sorry.
And the other one that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but a few brought in as that defensive midfielder was McVie as the lockdown defender. So 63, another serviceable score for him. So you're probably still going to get another couple of weeks out of him before you look at upgrading or moving on. You've probably got other players in defence that you could move first if you've got Zeeble and Sheasel to move back there.
Yeah, so Richmond next week who are depleted, then North Melbourne, then the Suns. So I think there's definitely some room for the Ds to kind of really, really tail up. Moving on to the next game, though, and it was a wet affair. The rain really did start to come down for the night game. You could visibly see it on the TV, and it was just absolutely bucketing down. Now, I had to drive off for a little bit of this, so I did catch, I think, the first and the last quarters. But Swiz, Bontempelli and the English show is pretty much where it's at. They pretty much exposed everything, and nearly as much as Waitman is the
exactly
go-to.
There is a little shot going on that Waitman got a little exposed there.
Well, I did say it's a cold night out and it's raining, so best bring your beanie.
But it completely was up till half time. I think English. Bont got the jump on English, and then English closed on him, and then Bont, and it was just those two. They were a good 30 points Supercoach ahead of anybody else coming into the halftime break. What actually hurt English was Lysett got subbed off. And they actually then put Dixon and Finlayson, and we were rubbing our hands together as an English owner, but it actually helped them. English, who was looking then going about 160, 170, really slowed down. Still got the 139. Bont was amazing. The typical Bont, only the 23 touches, but was clearance machine. I'm not too sure off the top of my head how many clearances he had. You might have it there, Benny, but he was getting everything out. There was English tap down and Bont out of the middle, hitting up the target.
Bont had 12 clearances.
Yeah, so absolutely dominant game from him. But they just didn't have a lot of other support. It was those two. What was pleasing for a lot of people who own him still is Liam Jones. Took some crucial intercept marks. the 15 touches, the 5 marks, and it really suited him because it was that wet, low-scoring game. Those marks and those goals have a bigger impact on your scoring. So, and just the tightness of the game too. So the scores would be level or be a 2-point game. Ball gets kicked in. Liam Jones takes intercept mark. Happy days. 8 points coming his way there. He ended up with 88, which fantastic for those who held him because that will restart his cash gen. And
he had a great game too.
He played really well. And with Bruce going off too, it was really him versus the world down there because no Alex Keith. So that'll put some more faith. His job security is just locked anyway. So no problems there. Oscar Baker, a little bit disappointed because he was only 31 at three-quarter time. Actually got really involved in the last quarter. Got up to 63, but got scaled back to 53, I think it might have been 61, scaled back to 63 just because of the result. And there was a moment late in the game where you had English, Jones, and Timmy O'Brien there to take the intercept. The boys called in Timmy O'Brien to take it, which that's not good for everybody else who owns Jones and English. And O'Brien tries to hit up hits out Baker, mucks up the kick, hits it straight to Butters. Butters kicks a goal and ices the game. So not only do we miss the intercept mark, plus the kick, but Baker was the obvious one on. And then those Baker's owners, and they were out the Dogs then too. They were, they had the overlap. So Baker probably could have ended up with a 65-70, but that one little kick, changed everything. But he did his role. He's probably the one that's most on the chopping block for a lot of rookies coming in. So, if you're trying to move or looking at downgrading someone in the next week or two, he probably will be the obvious one.
Yeah, especially with a couple of mid rookies, possibly, the sub duo, Johnson and
Roberts.
Roberts. Yeah, so that's probably the obvious choice maybe for that part of it. I thought so. Obviously, Dogs defenders weren't as great either. I mean, Richard's 82, but Dale stunk up a 57 after his big week last week. The other thing I noticed, I saw Caleb Daniels starting forward of stoppage, like CBA's a bit, like playing a little bit more forward instead of defense, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure how much of the game that he did that for those Swiz, but I did definitely see him
forward.
It was
just parts of that. And that's we talk about Bevo, our favourite player, old Magneto there.
Magneto, yeah.
At his best. And the conditions probably did allow that because it was one of those days where you're just trying to get the ball forward territory. So, maybe it's just Daniel, small man, small to the ground, get him forward and hopefully, easy to get down and pick up the ball. That might have been a bit of the thinking.
Speak about getting down and picking up the ball. We're going to take this in twofold. So I'm going to say Horn Francis, who had a killer fourth quarter. And speaking of the Mr. Invisible Man who disappears, Rosie was apparently one of the most frustrating people to own, I think it was last night. So I was lucky enough to come in and see the fourth quarter after doing my pickup rounds and the other duties that I had last night. But he was everywhere. So must have got a pep talk because he was on, I think, 25 Supercoach. And I was watching it going, I looked at it going, haha, sucks for all the Horn Francis owners. And then literally saw him get the ball, get clearance, get hard ball, inside 50. And I'm watching him just go up and up and up in Supercoach. I was like, holy crap, he has had the best fourth quarter I've seen in a long time for him. So, And then what about Rosie, mate? Because I came in when he was, I saw the chat and it was like, oh, never mind. He's on like 75 or 80 at three-quarter time. So what was the go?
Yeah, so really what it was Butters was their best player by far, played the 4 quarters, iced the game. But Butters' first half was in everything. He had a bit of support there from Boak. But Rosie and Horn Francis may as well have not been out there. They weren't not getting anywhere near that ball. It was all Butters out of that centre, the link up, moving the ball forward. Third quarter comes, and Rosie is now the man. He's the one in there. He's getting all the clearances. He's hitting players up. Just the impact of the game, and I think he scored about 50 points just in that quarter. Horn Francis was getting booed all night. A lot of Victorian supporters, even they were saying North Melbourne. I know Kane Corns was having a bit of a cry about it before on his show, but it was a case of, I think, just Victorian supporters not happy with the fact that in the way it's all panned out. So you'd think for a Port Adelaide home game, it would be a lot of cheering of Horn Francis, but it wasn't, and it was very notable. And it looked like we don't know what Hinkley said at three-quarter time. And then after the game in the rain, there was some good footage of them having a massive, discussion. So clearly there was something said, and Horn Francis then became the man in the last quarter and had that 60. So it probably adds to Port Adelaide's versatility, and not great for Supercoach point of view that at any point it's not okay. They're all going to get their 20 each quarter, 30 each quarter, and build their score that way. It's this quarter it's going to be Butters, this one's going to be Wines, Rosie, Horn Francis. Makes it a bit hard to probably man up from an opposition because they can sort of swap their roles and who's doing the defensive work around the stoppage, who's now the attacking clearance person. But that's exactly how it panned out, and it's just going to be it's going to be in a way all right because we're going to think at one point Rosie or Horn Francis, if you're an owner or a Butters owner, they're going to get their chance and opportunity in there. But at the same time, we're not going to probably get that massive, Rosie's going 140 this week because they'll swap around what they're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw an article about Butters saying, I didn't realize he was injured preseason coming in. I don't know if they really disclosed that too much, but he said that he had a interrupted preseason just before coming into the season, and it got to the point where now he feels like he was, able to attack and play to his strengths and get back into that midfield more. And then that was last week. Between last week's game and this week's game, that's what came out in the like some article. So I was like, oh, okay, like that's good. Maybe Butters will start to get to some more CBA. And he went 146 Supercoach. So a lot of 17 contested possessions, 7 clearances. So I just had a quick look. So he had 14 CBA. He had the most CBAs out of Port Adelaide. As well as, so actually Horn Francis got 14 as well. Rosie got 13. Ollie Wines 11 and Boak 0.
Yeah. What's the Bulldogs breakdown there, mate? What's the Bulldogs? What was their most?
Oh,
I was going to say, just because I wanted it in comparison compared to how many, well, there weren't that many goals for the CBAs anyway. So there's only 18. And then I guess you start of the quarter. So 22, but that probably shows Port, it's how shared it is.
Treloar had 19. Yeah. Bontempelli had 17. McRae, they're probably the big three, and Liberatore.
So that's
McRae had 12.
So Treloar's 19. Treloar's 19 out of 22, where Port Adelaide's most is 14 out of 22. So it's a much shared, and they've got because their players got the ability to go half forward, and even Boak, Horn Francis, they can all play forward. So it is, we talk about like Freo, for example, defence by committee. It's that for Port Adelaide, centre bounce by committee, and they're just going to continue to rotate it.
And I imagine Horn Francis would have got a lot of his 14 in that last quarter as well.
100%.
Yeah. So before that, whereas that's probably the good part about it, where they can rotate through a little bit, gives them a different mix up. It's harder for, as the game goes on, you kind of get used to what the opposing player's trying to do to you, etc. Or if you keep changing it up, you're like, oh, they're doing something different, and then you're having to try and react, which is where that difference does come into it. So, look, I thought it was very interesting. Williams got a 51. I don't know if he keeps his spot, though. Do you think he keeps his spot, Wiz?
It's a tough one. It's not like his game shouted to me, pick me in kind of Supercoach going forward. But, in the end of the day, it probably was sold enough. Mead probably goes out maybe before Williams, but they're probably getting to the point now where, maybe one bad game, he's back out. So where we were hopeful he could be a decent rookie. But then again, the conditions probably didn't suit him. That, it was a tough night, especially if you're a younger player out there. And that it's really it's back to like that suburban wet weather footy kind of thing. And if you haven't played it for a while, or if you're not a bigger body like some of those younger players are, you do get yourself knocked around a bit.
Yeah, and I think it's at least promising the fact that he did play with Burton in the side, as well as Darcy Byrne-Jones as well. So there is a slight positive out of that fact. But look, that's the Saturday football we're about to go, because in 15 minutes you've got, which will be probably less for you by the time this uploads, but there's the Sunday games today, so it's going to be super interesting as far as what happens there.
I'll throw that out right now because people are hopefully tuning in this before Collingwood St Kilda. There's a bit of rumours around about De Goey today.
Late out.
It could be a late out. So if you do have him, which a lot of the top teams do, you might want to plan around that. And that might be, McKenzie as your backup, or if you're looking to move him on. I also mentioned, draft stars as much as I can in my pods these days and daily stuff. GWS and Hawthorn is your game today. Hawthorn's midfielders, especially with Will Day out, you're looking at your Connor McDonald's, Good Price, Connor Nash's, those sort of players. And that game will be really interesting because we saw yesterday, we saw the Friday night game with Fremantle Gold Coast, how it was kind of more played straight down the middle because it's a skinnier ground. So I think Sicily owners will be really hoping that it'll be his day with the intercept marking there because they'll have to play direct. So, a couple really interesting matchups, especially the second and third games today.
Yeah, so that one is okay, right. So that's the narrower field. So that's going to be interesting then because I think some of the defenders did pretty well in that game because you had to go narrow. So it's going to be interesting. 10 meters shorter on each wing apparently. So
it's smaller than Geelong wide, which is unreal.
Yeah, that's definitely unreal to think about. But look, that's us. Swiz, we'll catch you early in the week for the podcast as well and the team reveals and our team discussions as well. If you are catching this, I might even try and do my, what was it, In a Nutshell series as well, where I try and do every team in 60 seconds or less. So we'll see how I go this week if I pass that one as well.
Good thing this week we actually don't have Thursday night footy for once. So,
thank God.
Yeah.
I mean, I like watching Thursday night footy, but from a fantasy perspective, because then I was trying to, even then, the 10:05 game, I had Constable on the bench, and I was like, oh, crap, I looked at the team. By the time I realized, I was like, I think I need actually some rookies to generate cash or restart my cash generation. So I had to bring Young in, but I already had Constable locked on my bench. So I was like, well, I don't even know. So I played him on field this week. I got super lucky with a 60. Dilemmas. All right, happy days. Thank you, Swiz, mate, and enjoy this afternoon's footy, and I'll catch you soon.
No problems.
Alrighty, boy.